I'd like to call the special council meeting of Thursday, November the 2nd, 2023 to order. I'd like to remind all participants that the call will be recorded for, public access and broadcast. So just a reminder of everybody on that. So I'd like to have a motion to call the meeting to order. Moved by Deputy Mayor Bannister, seconded by
Oh, sorry.
Councilor Thorne. Aye. I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
Seconded.
Moved by Councilor Molina, seconded by Councilor Thorne. Any questions to the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. I'll remind all councilors that conflict of interest forms in the middle of the table. Should there be any conflicts in tonight's agenda, please fill it out and pass it on to the clerk with the reason why. With that, we'll move on to the Salisbury Fire Station, or Fire Rescue Station. Item number 4.
Can you pull up the presentation? Okay, so we have a short presentation that will run through for this exciting project. It's been in the works for quite some time. If you go to the next slide, Diane, it'll run through kind of the purpose as to why we're doing the presentation this evening. So we'll give a short project background and timeline, speak to the proposed facility. We have Heather with us in the back if there's any specific questions as it relates to the building itself. And really what that is essentially publicly releasing what project has been in the works for again, like I mentioned, quite some time. And then we'll provide an overview of the feasibility study and the financing implications as it relates to this project and look for resolutions from council. I'll speak to just quickly before we dive into it as to why we have what we're calling a feasibility study at this phase. We have, as council is aware, been working with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, or FCM, under their Green Municipal Building Fund in hopes of pursuing funding for the capital side of this project. As part of that, we were eligible to apply for certain professional service fees with essentially some of the architectural and engineering fees, as well as some additional steps that we took as we looked to explore whether or not it was feasible and practical to pursue a net zero ready building. So that's really what the feasibility study looks at, and that's the elements that we'll highlight this evening. You go to the next slide. So a bit of project background. For several years, the municipality has been exploring the potential of exploring a new facility or a new station for the Salisbury Fire Rescue Department. This would ensure that the department has adequate space, permit for future growth, both within the department and for the town as it grows as well. And it would also enable the current space to become the Department of Infrastructure and Public Works area as well. The land was purchased in 2022, or formally, I guess, transferred over in 2022. And since then, a number of steps have been taken, mostly this year because there were some delays in light of local governance reform and what the municipality could and could not do during that process. At this point, concept design, schematic design, site clearing, and funding applications have either been completed or are very much in progress. And this evening, this is really the reason that we're coming, is to get authorization from council to pursue or to apply to the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board, or what I'll often call MCBB, for the borrowing authority for the facility. So this is generally not when we would come with this motion. It's a little bit earlier than we normally would, but because we need it for the full application for FCM, it's part of the process to make sure that we have the authority to borrow. So if the motion is passed by council this evening to do so, we would apply at the for a spot at the December 11th hearing, and the deadline for that is November 8th. So that's why we're having a special meeting this evening. And the reason we especially want to have it in before year end is because FCM is considering changing their program offer, which may have implications. So it's to ensure that we're grandfathered in the process that we've been exploring to date. If you go to the next slide, it covers some of the key milestones, obviously not exhaustive of what's been done to date. So in 2019, there was a needs assessment. In 2020, there was a 5-year capital plan for the department. Like we mentioned, in 2022, the land purchase was completed. January of this year, we issued an RFP for professional services, mainly architectural and engineering. In April, that contract was awarded. In May, we began the formal meetings. By August, the latest floor plans were presented to council, as we also sought direction on funding options, which again, we're speaking about this evening. In September, we submitted our feasibility application to FCM, which is the portion that would cover a grant for the work that's been completed to date, and that also council will be adopting this evening. Last month, now that we're into November, we can say last month, the full department was provided an opportunity to hear a presentation from the architect as well, and also vote on exterior renderings. We also completed site clearing last month, and this month we're finalizing the schematic design package, which is included in the feasibility study. And now we're preparing essentially for the next steps, which is getting things ready. If you go to the next slide. Ooh, there should be. Nope, I thought there was one more. Which is getting ready for the next funding application phase with FCM. So just to situate ourselves, as council knows, but for anyone that may be unfamiliar, the proposed location, if you look on the image on the right, this is the cleared land. And if you look on the left, those are Google Earth images just to situate yourself. So it's on Main Street or Route 106, the formal word. And the picture on the right is the day that site clearing and the site grubbing was completed. If you go to the next one, it shows more of an aerial photo. On the right-hand side, you can see the parcel of land in red. The fire station will not cover that full land. There will be about 3 acres remaining after the station, parking, future allowances. The front of it, down towards the bottom of the image, is Main Street, and the top is essentially could extend in the future to K Street. On the left-hand side, you can see a dashed blue line, which essentially will be in a future phase, a future access point for the department to ensure to limit the crossings that have to occur at Fredericton Road and Main Street, because it would require a left-hand turn. Provides a second access which, other than public safety, is good from an efficiency perspective as well. Now we go to the next step timeline slide that I thought was before. So this evening we have the special meeting of council where we're seeking the Boring Board resolution. Assuming that this will pass this evening, then what happens tomorrow is we're prepared to issue the renderings publicly to residents and stakeholders, which will also include information and background available on the town's website. By mid-November, we expect the capital application, the pre-application, to be submitted to FCM. Generally, that's about a 2 to 3 week timeline. So by the end of the month, the full application could be submitted, which starts the longer process. But they will want to have that Boring Board motion and application completed by then. This month, they'll be doing the geotech surveys on the land, and our consultants through Heather, they continue to work on the schematic design and start the construction documents, which is essentially the documents that go out to tender in the new year. We expect to hear from FCM around anywhere between May and August. It depends on their intake. And then in 2025, the building is intended to be occupied. And obviously there's an asterisk or a caveat there, which is that the next steps are contingent on receiving approval this evening, but also receiving the borrowing authority from the Boring Board. If you go to the next slide, we start talking about the facility itself. So some really obviously high level highlights, but we're looking at about a 12,500 gross square footage for the building area. So that's including the square footage on the lot itself. There's about a 2,500 square foot second floor area that will be used for both training and storage. The facility will have 4 double drive-through apparatus bays, separate public access, which we'll speak to in the floor plan. It's easier to explain it there, but it will have a small multi-purpose or meeting room with accessible washrooms, parking in the front, and then a number of different spaces for the firefighters. Like I mentioned, there's a second floor mezzanine. It's about 2,900. It's since been changed in the latest design to be about 2,600. But that will be used for storage and training, and also provide space for future needs within the department. The building will be generator equipped, although it will not be designed as a post-disaster rated facility. And like we've inferred to earlier, the intent of the facility is to ensure that we're able to build for the future. So the intent is to have a 50+ year facility. And that includes a number of different things, whether it's additional lockers than we would need now. There's a flex space that the fire department had asked for where a number of them work remotely. And daytime coverage is when we have issues with coverage, but also when we have most of our calls. There's additional space for equipment. There's additional space on the land, and the washroom facilities as well, again, permit for future growth. And then within the facility, it includes a small gym, lounge, washroom, flex space, like we mentioned, washrooms, the chief's office, breathing apparatus room, compressor room, gear cleaning room, a hose tower, and then obviously the standard space for things like janitorial and mechanical and electrical requirements. If you go to the next slide, it gives an overview of the floor plan. The real purpose of this is to show the blue and the orange. So you can see the blue is what we were speaking to for the multi-purpose area, which is essentially where the public will be able to access. It includes the main entrance, washrooms, and the multi-purpose room itself. The orange is where the public would not necessarily have access to unless they have essentially a key fob or access throughout the remainder of the building. So it's intended to be the firefighter space. Include the mezzanine or second floor area, just because essentially what it is right now is just a rectangle that shows that it's there. The intent of this was just to show the delineation. If we go to the next slides, what I would say is the exciting part and what makes it feel a little bit more real. These are updated renderings. 3 were presented and shown to both the department and council earlier this fall, I guess. This was the preferred option and the option that we'll use for the purposes of renderings. It's since been updated hot off the presses as of today, that show some more life to the rendering. So you can see some parking spaces, some vehicles, including fire station, and some small tweaks that show what the facility is currently expected to look like. Go to the next slide. Again, it's a rendering, but from an opposite view. And the next one is an evening or nighttime option to show. So one of the pieces that we'll mention through this design and the direction that we've gotten has been this building will be on Main Street and will also be one of the largest capital investments of the municipality. And we wanted to not only show an environmental leadership element like we'll speak to, but also the importance of meeting our beautification priorities that we're setting as a municipality as well. If you go to the next slide, we'll start diving into the elements that are within the feasibility study. So as part of this, we undertook an energy model, which essentially looked at comparing the proposed floor plan with standard construction or energy performance based on the 2017 National Energy Code and based on some proposed elements that are now being included in design. So it showed essentially quantified different energy consumption savings within the two models. And the models will be updated as certain elements in the construction documents are finalized as well. One example, for instance, is that the R value used in the scenario that we're exploring for the walls was R32, and the walls that are being used are ICF, so that has an R value of R35, for an example. So it is something that is, at this current point, is still obviously preliminary, but is considered to be sort of a safe guess, and you'll see when we dive into the next slide, the energy savings are significant. So the overall energy performance between the two models is 58% better than the reference used. And that doesn't include an allowance for future solar panels. So that's the building as is being proposed to be constructed. The two main things is the R value, which is again 70% better than baseline, and the space energy or the space heating, savings, which is 63.8, and space cooling at 70.3. What that equates to in terms of GHG or greenhouse gas emission savings is approximately 27 tons annually. And in terms of operating costs with energy specifically, it's over $30,000 annually. And like I mentioned, the two main key elements that as it relates to the specific design is the fact that it's exploring ICF and geothermal as the primary heating source. And then, as mentioned, as it relates to solar, there is an allowance in the lands and also be included in the electrical costing to allow for future solar connections, which will again increase the energy efficiency and will allow a spot specifically on the site plan to ensure that that's there for basically when funding becomes available for the municipality to get that extra step to fuel the rest of the building. The next continues the feasibility study key elements. It does essentially, in terms of quantifying, when we look at the annual debenture and using FCM as a potential funder, it means about 121,000 less on an annual basis through the debenture. Over the course of a 20-year term loan, it equates to just over 2.4 million in savings on the debenture exclusively. And with the annual operating costs on top of those savings, we look at over the term of a loan of the 20 years savings over 3 million. The proposed facility is in alignment with a number of strategic priorities that have been identified by the town, most notably the strategic plan that has a specific item for this project. But also, as noted in the feasibility study, it relates to a number of other plans and priorities, whether it's the municipality's economic development plan, the climate adaptation plan, provincial climate change plans and strategies, as well as those of FCM and the federal government. And it also includes, as noted in the feasibility study, a number of key social and community elements that are either, as mentioned in the slides, addressed, improved, or enabled, and includes a number of other environmental benefits that aren't necessarily even quantified in the energy model, whether it be promoting on-site drainage, water storage, the future solar array, rainwater collections, and just climate resiliency in general. If you go to the next slide, we start diving into the actual financing or debenture options. Initially, when we had discussed some of these options, we had looked at taking advantage of some of FCM's flexibility with their terms through their Green Municipal Fund and proposing a 30-year term. The Municipal Capital Borrowing Board cautions against that to a significant degree, under the premise that where it's a building, there will be elements within the building that we will be paying over the course of 30 years that would require replacement or significant repair by that 20-year mark. And so they strongly encourage to go with the 20-year term. We've adopted our numbers exclusively to look at those. In order to go for a 30-year term, it is possible. We would need essentially an engineered report to justify that the building contents could be eligible to withstand that debenture period to ensure we're not replacing things while still paying for them. And the real kind of benefit of FCM's Green Municipal Fund, other than pushing us a little bit further as it relates to environmental elements, is that 15% of the eligible costs come in the form of a grant to the municipality. There's limited funding availability beyond what we know as gas tax or CCBF to allocate towards municipal buildings, but also fire halls just in general. And so this provides an opportunity for us to tap into something at the same time. And then FCM also offers up to $10 million of a loan at a lower interest rate than the traditional borrowing authorities. So, for example, they advise to use 4% for the debenture calculations, whereas the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board advises to use 5%. These are, again, obviously approximate. And as we've seen, it's stabilizing a little bit, but the interest rates have been a little bit all over the place, as we've seen in the last couple of years in general. So if you look at the debenture options, you can see based on the amount, the borrowing authority. So I'll stress that as well, that it is the borrowing authority. This isn't exclusively the cost of the building per se. It's an authority that we're pursuing. There's a number of different buffers and cushions in there, but we're using the number of 7.5 million. And you can see on the top row that equates to a grant of about 1.1 million from FCM. The remainder that will be financed through a loan with FCM at a lower interest rate, again, is mentioned using a term of 20 years. And you can see in the bottom right cell there that it's the annual savings of about just over 120,000. So if you go to the next slide, there are 3 recommendations for council this evening. I'll explain the rationale, and then we can pass them over to the mayor to facilitate those. But essentially, we're looking, as mentioned, for the authority to apply to the Capital Borrowing Board, which is that first one. That's a standard motion to apply to them. The second one is the council adoption or a receiving of the feasibility study that we would advise FCM that stage has been completed. It is also a requirement for the full capital project, or the full capital application, I should say, with FCM. And then the third is not on the slide for the sake of length, but is a resolution that FCM will look for that indicates support from council to direct staff to continue conversations with them in hopes of receiving funding and essentially authorizing the application or the endorsement of the application for the full capital project. So with that, I'll pass it over to you and we'll dive into the motion.
All right, council, we have three motions that we'll be bringing forward. Councilor, if anybody would like to put the first motion forward?
I'll move that the municipality of Salisbury submit to the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board an application for authorization to borrow for a capital expense for the following term and amount. Purpose, protective services, construction, Salisbury Fire Rescue Facility, amount $7.5 million, term 20 years.
So moved by Councilor Oblina, seconded by Councilor Thorne. Questions to the motion?
You have a
This
question.
includes the 20,
Hope coming.
John is here.
Oh, okay.
Was that John or Joe?
John,
John?
that's the 20-year term included in that motion.
20-year term, yeah.
20-year term, John.
I don't understand why we cannot have a 30-year term if the building's supposed to last 50 years.
You didn't hear that.
He said he can't understand why we can't have a 30-year term if the building's gonna last 50 years.
So the building itself may last 30 years, but yeah, exactly. But the systems and things that we'll be using for within the building, whether it's heating, lights, whatever that may be, generally needs replacement or repair, significant repair by that 20-year mark. So the borrowing board doesn't like to authorize borrowing debentures where from a standard practice, we'll need to replace things while we're still paying for the building. So it is still possible to do that. We would have more flexibility with FCM than we would the borrowing board, but we can't ask FCM for something that the borrowing board does not authorize, and the borrowing board will not authorize it unless we get our engineering consultants essentially to look in detail at the systems as it relates to their lifespan and have an engineered report that says for the borrowing board that says that they'll withstand that 20-year time period, basically.
Councilor Oblina?
So my question was, we're going for $7.5 million. If we get rejected by FCM, there's parts of that can be pulled out of it.
So this is just an authority, it's a ceiling. The standard practice is to inflate it, because if we, let's say that we were borrowing $100,000 and the building came back at $150,000. If we don't have that 50,000, we have to reapply to the borrowing board, so it saves that process. So in the feasibility study, there's certain elements that we don't want to necessarily publish right now as it relates to cost, because it can affect the tendering process, but there's a buffer in there in a number of different places, but it's just a ceiling. So let's say we apply to FCM and we're unsuccessful. We have a couple of options. We can look at not doing some of the environmental elements. That would mainly be geothermal. There's not a significant cost as it relates to ICF and wood. Really, it would be the geothermal piece. It doesn't mean that we're going to borrow 7.5 if we are or not successful. So at that point, we could, like I mentioned, scale back, or we could decide if we're going to proceed with those costs at their rates.
So I did have a question. You may have it, or maybe Heather would, but the future option on the solar, and if this was answered previously, I apologize. We have roughly about 3 acres of land that's remaining. How much land would the additional solar have require?
It's about, do you want to answer the approximate?
Well, we don't have those numbers from the engineer yet.
Okay.
And I think the 70 kilowatts, so it's however many, in my brief, very high level research, it looked to be, like a couple thousand square feet versus acres. It didn't seem like it would take up acres of it.
Thank you.
We're also leaving future space for if there is a need down the road for something like a detached garage, that sort of thing.
That's
All of those can be integrated into that sort of building as well, so.
yeah, no, that makes sense. That's why I was asking. I just didn't have an idea on what solar would take up in the future. That's good.
So
Go ahead.
following that, so would solar not be able to go on the roof of the building?
It could, the engineers recommended not doing it on roof, and then also, putting the roof being pitched, that limits the amount you can put on. So it would be a blend of both. if you did it on the roof that's there now, the other option being the flat roof, which definitely, so yeah, it was, you'd have to put some on the ground anyway, and the engineers thought for maintenance reasons and snow removal and all that type of thing, that on the ground is actually a better solution than on the roof in this case.
Additional questions? Joe and John?
I'm good.
No additional questions? Oh, sorry,
Just
go
one
ahead,
quick
John.
comment. I'm just still hung up on the equipment repair, the 30-year timeline. To me, general maintenance dictates that you replace repair equipment over time. I don't understand why that's a hang up on a 30-year dimension.
We,
Sure.
Sure.
An example of that, one would be a heat pump system, so the system that will go with, whether it's geothermal or not, they usually have like a 15 at most, or 20 at most year kind of life expectancies, and that's a big piece of equipment, so I think that's kind of one of the things they're speaking to in particular, is that you would have to buy a new heat pump for the system within 20 years, definitely before 30. So that's just an example, I think that they may be speaking about.
so we would be paying on that system for an additional 10 years while we're paying for a replacement of said system. Yeah, it's an, I'll put it this way, like I mentioned, it's an option. It would require a motion from council to amend the term, and it would require direction to us. We would then go back to the engineering firm and say, we need you to look at this, and it needs to be a written report stamped, signed by an engineer before the borrowing board will consider a 30-year term, because their buildings are considered standard at 20.
There's benefits to 20 as well, because
Yeah.
they'll come off the books faster.
That's
Yeah.
right, savings. Yeah.
Except taxes are higher to facilitate that annual payment. But my only point is that the whole building is not defunct the minute the HVAC system is gone. Anyways, we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion?
Right.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. Moving on to item number 2.
No, other motions.
Or-
I-
oh,
I'll do the second one.
Sorry.
I move that the town of Salisbury adopt the feasibility study prepared for the purpose of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities GMF program feasibility study stream, and adopt its findings as it relates to the Salisbury Fire Rescue Station.
So moved by Deputy Mayor Bannister, seconded by Councillor Thorne. Questions to the motion? Hearing no questions to Joe and John, I just want to make sure that you guys could hear.
Yep, I'm good.
Perfect.
One quick question with the FCM stuff. Is there anything specific that you have to do to meet the requirement?
I did, sorry.
Anything you have to do specifically to meet the FCM requirements, but I think that's just the environmental stuff,
But,
right?
yeah, so it needs to target net zero performance, hence the net zero ready building. In order to apply, there's certain things that have to be done, i.e. a feasibility study, which is this motion. We've applied to the feasibility study stream to help cover some of the costs for that, but this needs to be completed by then. We need to consult with the province, have borrowing board authority, have a risk management plan, which is included in that. So there's those things there, but in terms of the general requirements, it's the net zero ready performance, which is quantified in the energy model report.
Perfect, thanks.
No additional questions. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
You got it.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. We have the third motion to read.
I'll read this one. Whereas the town of Salisbury's strategic plan identifies the need for a new facility for the Salisbury Fire Department, or Salisbury Fire Rescue Department. Whereas the town of Salisbury recognizes the need to take environmental action and wants to demonstrate its commitment to being a leader in environmental sustainability. Whereas the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCN's Green Municipal Fund helps local governments switch to sustainable practices faster through a unique mix of funding, resources, and training that gives municipalities the tools they need to build resiliency and create better lives for Canadians. Whereas the town of Salisbury has demonstrated financial commitment to the project by contributing financially through a land purchase, design fees, site clearing, and by applying for a, should that say through, for a debenture? Through the,
Yes.
yes? You want me to pause? Well,
What does it say now?
it says through.
Or A.
Yes.
For a through,
Yes.
for a debenture through the New Brunswick Municipal Finance Corporation for the remainder of the expenses. Whereas the feasibility study exploring a net zero ready facility demonstrates quantifiable savings for both energy emissions and operating costs, as well as debenture payments if successful under FCM's program. Be it therefore resolved that the Town of Salisbury direct administration to continue ongoing conversations with FCM and submit a full capital project application under the Green Municipal Fund Energy Sector Capital Project Stream for the purposes of obtaining funding and resources for the Salisbury Fire Rescue Station. So moved.
Moved by Councilor Thorne. You're very thankful that word was correct.
So then we got a lot of-
I'm glad I paused.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Bannister. Questions to the motion?
We have Councilor Thorne read it again.
Yeah, we didn't get it all.
Yeah, right. I didn't understand. We have a clerk read that back. John and Joe?
Good.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Contrary minded? Motion carried. Moving on to item number 5, 2024 utilities budget.
We're all set. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, for all your.
But while Heather's here, are there any questions? And the chief came in as well. If there's any questions before we go on to the next item, just in
Dan
general.
Uranto, by the way, good job, Council.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Historic moment for the town.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, so,
Jumping and clicking your heels together.
yeah.
Priorities, I get it. I think we all do, but that's all right. It's more important.
So, we're looking for sorry, you introduced it.
Yeah, no, I did introduce you. Yeah.
So we're looking for direction from council as it relates to the utility budget, which is sewer, basically, is the budget that manages the sewer system. So as a quick Coles Notes, a reminder, this is funded exclusively through user fees. It must maintain itself. And it only applies to those people that use user fees or only people that are connected to the system, for the sewer system itself. I'll run through this kind of overview quickly, but there are kind of 4 key elements that we're looking for direction on from council. The first is that annually there's a transfer from the utility fund to the general operating fund. The intent of that is to cover the fact that in Salisbury we don't have staff that are on the books per se exclusively in the utility. So it covers staff, gas, things like general time, billing, those sorts of things, whether it's the public works side of things or the admin staff. And so traditionally, there's just been a fixed amount. In 2021, it was increased from 170,000 to 230,000, and it's remained at that since. Where it hasn't been formally quantified, and it's what we would call a variable number, we have reduced it as part of the conversations for proposing a rate this year. We would like council direction to do that because generally where it's been 230, the intent would be that we would start quantifying that and looking exactly what that rate should be. Where it has been 170 historically, I think it started at 150 and had increases, and they were just increases based on those particular years. Our preference is to make sure that we look at that and formally quantify it. But that is something that has been reduced in the proposed utility. The second item is that there is work proposed in 2024 that was actually deferred from 2023. So that's for the polishing pond work. We're including a $20,000 contribution in the budget next year. Our total share is about 25,000, and that's through the integrated bilateral agreement. More than likely, where we're delaying it another year, we'll see a slight inflation in prices again. So we paid the engineering fees to date on this year's utility So we maintained a $20,000 contribution there. We are proposing a transfer. Sorry, from our utility reserve to offset those expenses for that particular project. It is capital, which allows us the opportunity to do that. In the proposed utility budget, we've maintained a transfer, a budgeted transfer, I should say, to the general capital reserve. Annually since I think the system's inception, I think has had a transfer of 30,000, which has kind of got us to that 300,000 that was mentioned above. We've reduced it. The reason it's that random number is essentially because that's the number that we reduced to get to match the revenues and expenses. It's important, in our opinion, to keep that there, just because of the fact that it also provides a buffer. So if something unexpected happens, it does allow us to say, well, we can't make a transfer to reserves. We have to use some of those funds. But also it's just a best practice, obviously, to include that in the budget to make sure that we're continuing to build that. We're seeing the need to start tapping into those funds that have historically been put aside for the very reason that the system is aging, and at the same time, the costs are rising as well. And then the last thing is we're throwing it out there to council. We have thoughts on it and can speak to that when we get there, but we bill once annually right now. Every municipality does it a little bit differently depending on their particular circumstances. So some bill quarterly, some bill biannually, some bill annually. It depends. So right now we are doing it annually, but that is an option to look at. And we'll just throw the caveat again that if that is amended, we do have to modify the bylaw with 3 readings. It's not in the schedule, it's in the bylaw itself. If that is something that we want to explore. So those are the 4 elements. We gave this just as we got to, like we gave it this evening. So it wasn't part of the package ahead of time. So we could have a discussion on those, or I can run through some of the summary. I don't want to sit here and talk the whole time. And I need to go refill this if I'm gonna run through the summary. So we can we're looking for direction basically from council. The main thing I guess I will highlight before I fill that, if we're going to go through, is if you look, we added some costs from 2019 that basically is an average cost per service request when we're called out for projects. Some of them are different in scale. Some of them would involve more paving than others. So it's not necessarily apples to apples. It is just intended to be a comparison. And in 2023, there really is only one on the books per se. But if you look between 2019, that average cost per service request was about 4,100 if we round up. In 2023, what would be a standard repair costed 8,000. So that is showing some of the costs that are increasing. There's some elements in the utility budget that were just buffers and were not specifically dedicated to things like repairs. So again, we're seeing a lot of cost increases in this sector of the municipal operations. So I guess I'm not sure what council would like to do, if they want me to give the summary or have a discussion or ask questions or what the preference is. I'm gonna go fill this. Well, yeah, sure, actually, there is some.
I think the summary would be important.
Yes, I agree.
Can I request a quick recess first?
Yes. Yeah, that would be good for me.
Could I have a motion for a
I'd
recess?
like to move that we enter into a recess.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Bannister. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded?
Aye.
We're now going to recess. We could have a motion to return back to the regular council session. So moved by Councilor Thorne, seconded by Deputy Mayor Bannister. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Okay, we're back in regular council session, and I'll ask Austin to give us a summary.
So, like I mentioned, funded by user fees, no impact on tax rate. It must maintain itself, and it's paid by users who are connected to the system. The main thing to keep in mind, our rate right now in 2023 is $325 per unit. The utility budget that you see in front of you this evening would propose a rate of $400 per unit. So it is an increase of $75. You also have in the attachment comparatives to other municipalities. like it mentions here, every utility system with sewer is different. So in Salisbury, one of the caveats or unique elements that all may not necessarily have is the fact that we have 4 lift stations and an aerated lagoon system. So some municipalities would still have, for example, gravity-fed systems which require no power, may not have 4 lift stations. Some may have 10 lift stations. It is different from system to system. In 2024, we have the Polishing Pond stabilization project that we mentioned, was from this year delayed to next because of permitting issues. And in the utility, deficits are carried over from the 3rd previous year. So in 2024, it's the surplus or deficit from 2021, which means that the following year in 2025, the deficit will carry, or sorry, the utility budget will carry a deficit of 43,000, which if you divide that by the number of units just alone is $34. So that's something that will be required to manage next year. But it's important to note this year, and also shows that the utility is operating essentially in a deficit position. In 2025, the town has, on the asset management plan, a renewal project of the treatment pond, which is for sludge removal. So that's to extend the life of the existing pond. It's as glorious as it sounds. But in 2024, we do have engineering fees to start that essentially design work to get that ready for the following year. I mentioned the elements around repairs and some of those costs. Again, not apples to apples necessarily, but is intended to give you a ballpark. And the primary changes that are in the utility budget, I'll run through them quickly. So it reduces the transfer from utility to operating by 30,000. It increases audit and insurance fees by 3%. We've added 20,000 in a line for engineering professional services. While that will mainly focus on the sludge removal project, some instances of where we would generally use engineering in the utility next year is the polishing pond project, sludge removal, also flow monitoring for some commercial properties that pay more units based on flow, but that may not be paying what they should be, but that needs to be monitored through flow monitoring. We have the contribution for the polishing pond for next year, as mentioned, and we've maintained the $75,000 repair for sewer mains, which is anything under the ground near properties, basically. But based on the amount that we spent this year, we've earmarked a portion of that specifically for an allocation or an allowance for CCTV recordings, which was recommended in the asset management plan to start earmarking some funds to know that we can proactively put a certain amount aside to get some done on a regular basis, as opposed to only reactively. We've added a line for lift station repairs specifically. Again, right now, there's no allocation for those. But in 2023, we spent over $15,000 so far on them. And again, it's the reality of having aging infrastructure, and the work needs to be done when the repairs need to be done on them. Similar to the same, there was no dedicated amount for repairs of the treatment facility itself. So we've added a small allocation there, which would be things at the treatment plant specifically. And then there's also the other elements for things like the routine standard testing that we have to complete, so on and so forth. And just for comparison, there's $1,000 budget in that right now, but in that section we spent just over $6,000 this year. And then, as mentioned, to get the revenue and the based on the rates, we've adjusted the transfer to reserve funds to balance that. And then what I will just mention, just in case it is asked or down the road wondered, it was noted that the intent would be to start adding basically allocations or allowances towards lift station generators. So every time that there's a power outage, the lift stations do not operate without power. And so we actually have to give a report to the Department of Environment, local government, as it relates to potential flow that was not put through the lift station, so on and so forth. And so generators would obviously fix that, but that is not in the utility budget next year. So that's the summary. And again, looking for discussion and direction to figure out what we look at.
If it doesn't go through a lift station, where does it go?
Straight through
Where? The lagoon?
to
or
our polishing pond.
Creating sludge.
Which needs to be.
No, so the polishing pond, so, which is not something that was necessary, so you've got your
We have.
lagoon.
We don't-
Yeah, it is very good, we have it. So you got your lagoon and then past, so the wetland area is kind of like a polishing pond. So that it meanders through that before it actually hits the river. So when they did it, they put it on there because as an added feature, which helps. But it still goes through a little stronger than it should be, right?
We're gonna discuss, do we have a motion? and then-
There's no motion, we just need a discussion for
Well, I
direction.
guess, I do have a question, and so, after we had the asset, the report discussion the other night on the criticality of our infrastructure in our community, and you mentioned it's been underfunded. The risk, again, lift stations, all of it. Over time, if we don't increase this, we're going to have crumbling infrastructure that's going to continue to decay. From a public perspective, it's a service that it's not sexy, but they do expect to be able to turn on the water, their tap, their tubs to see it drain and toilets flushing. So, going back historically, it does seem like a huge increase. But going back historically, I do see that, back in 2005, going to 2006, there was an increase of $85 that was needed at that time for very similar circumstances. We're now, many years later, but we're obviously running a deficit where even that amount is not enough to keep up with the infrastructure costs. So getting back to just, talking or hearing reports from Public Works over time, and again, just some additional work with when lines do crumble and to dig them up, the cost in one job this year was just crazy. So unfortunately, it's just the reality of infrastructure that's not been maintained for many years that we have to start keeping on top of.
It's not any different than, if you're on your own private and all of a sudden something collapses. I mean, you do need to,
Right. You
you
do.
do need to ante up and repair it.
So we have to.
I mean, this is, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you have to have a break, you have to have a break even here and.
And generators that are at our lift stations are critical. Again, on that from an environmental perspective, but just from the backup and serviceability perspective, with weather events continue to get worse and worse. So it's not gonna, weather events are not gonna get nicer, I hate to say that.
On a good side, I don't want to make it sound like that. If there's no power at your house to flush the toilet either. So there isn't as much going through as like if you think about it, there's not as much
That's
going
true.
through.
Right.
Although more
Still.
houses are running generators.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other side of it.
What's that?
My water works.
Oh,
Mine
Yeah,
does.
that's what a lot of them are. So.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
Question.
Is that okay? if I
Yeah,
ask a question? I don't want to get into the weeds. I just want to understand what's happening with the revenue line for the sewer rates.
Same question.
Why is it so off from the budget? Why is the budget so much higher than what 1157 times 325 would be? Like, where did the budget number come from? And why is our actual for this year so off?
So the 2023 budget is what you're asking.
Yes.
So, funny thing, when the budget, you separate it by residential and industrial.
Yeah.
And we will be separating this year, like all of them.
Yeah.
That's something we're doing. We submitted the two amounts to our transition.
Coordinator.
Facilitator. Yeah.
When the budget came back, he put both the full amount plus the industrial as both.
So we're not just jumping the budget.
No.
Like that 366 is 1,128 units at 325. So that's like, it has to jump that much more.
Yes, it has to jump even more, you're right.
Okay.
And we also went
That's
through and did an audit, like to really, this year to make sure about our units.
Yeah.
The
Make
non-residential
sure, like
or
non-residential,
multi-units.
residential, changing it.
Yeah.
We've also flagged a few that we may want to look at.
Could you explain that
specifically.
just in line with the facilitator again, so I understand that a little better?
He put the wrong amount in for revenue.
That's why.
So you're already-
I heard it, but I want to be blunt on the record. We had no control over the budget last year. This council had no input on the budget last year.
We sent in some information and when it came back, that's what it came back.
Okay, that's why I
So
just
what
wanna-
he's trying to say is that
No, I
amount
know.
already.
I get what she
Yeah.
said. I just want to be clear
Less.
on the record that the numbers we're dealing with, there was an input error last year that this council had no input on. And it needs to be corrected this year.
Which makes sense why
It
we're
does.
so under budget
Right.
with our
So we have
actual.
a shortfall, so that's, I just want to be clear, because the public will be listening to this, we have to increase it. This is not the doing this to us, like we are dealing, coming into a deficit perspective just on a budget that was provided last year by
Well, I
government.
think there's, because that's three, like it carries forward 3 years. I think there's a lot of things that are outside
No,
of
no, I-
anybody's control,
No, I-
costs.
Like, I know,
Yeah.
I can't say it's everything, but I just wanted to call that out, because it's important that as we go into this, that we're dealing with things that are being dealt with.
The sewer account interest that we're budgeting for revenue scares me because
Hmm.
there's no bad debt line in here either for money that's not gonna get collected. Should we be nervous about that?
That was the other line that we spoke about
Mhm.
today. So the line that we have here was based on, like, if you look here, it'd be the second one.
Yeah.
That's how much we brought in in interest payments in 2023.
Mhm.
There was a bad debt line, which essentially historically used to be adjusted to balance. So like what we did when we balanced, or not balanced, when we adjusted the reserve transfer, what used to be transferred was that bad debt line, or not transferred, what used to be adjusted, sorry, was that bad debt line.
Okay.
And so the number that was there, I think,
Is the
was,
one that we put next to for the actual budgeted amount. The 38.
What would be an example of people not paying their utility bill? Is it because they just don't pay their utility bill? Or,
That's correct.
and
In multitude.
how does
And some
that
people
happen?
don't pay at all.
So,
So interest is calculated. So the problem is you don't know when you're gonna recover some of that, so you're kind of guessing at what you're gonna get for interest.
That's why I would not put anything in for interest
It's all
personally.
recoverable when the house sells, right?
If,
Like,
if,
Yeah.
yeah,
it's a judgment
Yeah.
against,
yeah.
You put a
Yeah.
lien on
so
it.
you do put a lien on it to recover.
You'll
it.
eventually recover.
So it is a,
And
So it's not like you can just shut their water off. It's
No.
not that kind of thing. You can't just shut their Hoover off.
we can turn it off, it's expensive.
That would later be the benefit of having a water system. If we have a water system, we can shut it right off with the
Yeah.
curb.
Well, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
but.
but some of these accounts are so behind
So,
and the interest sits there and we can do nothing.
and is it something that's like a huge carry forward from a
Yes.
lot of years ago?
There's like 300 and some thousand that were on receivables for years and years and
Oh,
years.
my word.
And we've been in the last little bit, have been kind of, putting more concerted efforts, I'll
It was
say.
a
and
big push
collective.
when the
Right.
previous council got in, like,
Yeah.
that's
Wow.
gotta get cleared up.
do we know what that's sitting at?
I don't have it right
No, I
in front of
didn't
me,
do
but,
it, sorry.
yeah, but,
But
we
for
can,
the
we can
record,
get it.
I
It's a
am
lot
ready.
less.
I am ready to start turning people's,
Yeah.
like,
Well, I mean.
And we-
it's-
we
it's-
explored
It
it.
should be just very that simple.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what, you have a utility bill. It's not unlike your tax bill.
right.
It's a service, needs to be paid. Yeah, to me, that's just,
We explored it last year and there's, I can't speak to specific properties, obviously, but, it can be an expensive undertaking depending on where you are, i.e. if you have to rip up sidewalk or if you have to rip up.
yeah, I mean,
that's-
I get that,
Yeah,
obviously.
which kind of puts us in a bad spot.
Yeah.
However, I'm willing to make somebody, be what's the word?
Example?
Example. But we're,
Well, I mean,
That should
at
be.
the
part
end of
of
the day,
it,
other people are
that's all.
paying.
It's all-
They're paying for people.
it's very-
So just a quick question. And I'm not sure you can actually do this. I know that in certain circumstances in certain businesses, there may be other things tied to making your payments. So is there any other way that we can incentivize people to pay their utility bill, i.e., and I know you wouldn't use this as an example, so I don't have a really good one, but as an example, if you said, right, when you go to get your license renewed, you won't get it renewed unless you're up to date on this. Now, that wouldn't be the example we use, but do we have any leverage from a town perspective? Something like that says that we could link you're paying your utility bills to maybe something else that, that is more desirable for the resident?
A lot of towns use water as they
Yeah.
shut the water off and then they shut it right off the curb, and obviously people require water to live. Unfortunately, we don't have that until we bring a water system in. A water system is a lot easier to shut off because there's a shut off right at the
Every
curb,
property.
right at the property, and you don't have to deal in what clerk's office was talking about, the big costs of digging up and moving sidewalks and then all of that infrastructure cost and which also affects the public as well. I just want to call it out when we do those type of things. So that's one item, Joe, Counselor Tori.
That's a question.
Go ahead, John. Is it John?
Is there any way to publicly shame people to actually fall in line in terms of either a website which lists all the properties that are delinquent and or a 4x8 billboard on the front lawn of the municipality of the town office stating all the delinquent accounts?
I would not recommend that. I think that would open us up to,
It's the right to privacy, which
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
lot to say.
yeah, like we can't like publish those sorts of things. Yeah, there's no real way of doing that.
I think we just have to keep being diligent
I
with
think,
our.
I mean,
collective
we've come a
calls.
long way since we first
Yeah.
started as a council. I'm very proud of the job that the office has done, the council has done. But we have to be diligent on that. I think that is something though that we should be talking about on a regular basis, having it brought forward to the committee of a whole, that we continue to tackle this and
Yeah.
look for options.
When you do file a judgment, though, that can be made public.
It would be public.
It would be
Yeah.
public. We would necessarily post that, but it would.
No.
No, but I mean,
It is public, though.
definitely
Public record
like,
goes to
you
court.
know, the public record, the Gazette or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
that is. The Gazette.
Yeah,
You search for
It
the court
is,
Yeah.
dockets or whatever, that it would, I assume.
yeah.
I mean, maybe we could consult other municipalities. What are they doing? How are they doing it? How are they, you know?
Same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot are in the same situation and
Yeah.
like the challenge is with the water system, it's quite easy. You turn,
Yeah.
you turn it off. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think it's, I've had I mean, I know that the clerk's office has as well, and we actually sat one day with another municipality where they're facing the same challenges of collection and shutting down and.
So we are billing on a monthly basis?
Yearly.
Yearly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what if we changed and made it more feasible for the user and we did a monthly billing? I know that that's a lot more work for the staff. But would that maybe help them manage that? To have like a monthly, get them to sign up on a pre-authorized debit
Yeah.
and then.
To do pre-authorized debits with your bank, I don't know.
You could through your bank like a
But you
bill.
can through your,
You could,
yeah, you can
yeah.
send a visa bill through CIBC
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
go through Service New Brunswick and.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
something to consider. We did talk about, I mean,
Because that would be like, you know what, we could make a move, we could make a motion that we're making a move, a move. That going forward. To have this service, you have to be on a pre-authorized debit contract. I mean, there's lots of organizations, there's lots of services out there that's the only way you get the service.
I think like one of the challenges is the with the monthly piece, like, because a lot of municipalities do it differently. Most of them, the most frequent, I would say, is quarterly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think our preference, if we change it, is biannually, like twice a year, would be the preference, the recommendation from our side of things. It does require a change from bylaw. In the bylaw, it's a quick tweak, I guess, really, but.
So question on some of the delinquent accounts.
Mhm.
They are making, we have made payment terms with them.
Mhm.
In-
Or
in-
filed them with
in-
judgment.
Or in filed their judgment. In those cases, some of them are paying monthly.
Mhm.
So in some of the ones that are delinquent, they
Right.
are kind of following that.
Yeah.
It's just not enough to.
There are some that will not pay whether you had it monthly,
Yes,
quarterly.
until,
They can just-
until, yeah,
till- yeah.
I get it. There's people out there that.
But we've cleaned it up quite a bit, so when
Good.
you look at, like, you'll see you guys will see quite a difference.
Well, when you
We'll
start
bring it
looking at-
updated next week.
Yeah.
I get a water system costs a lot of money, but that is just one of the benefits of.
John Weaver had a hand up there,
Yeah.
sorry.
Software is still new. John? I
was just curious, instead of digging up sewer pipes, if it's cheaper just to take them small claims court or something to that effect.
Mhm.
Is it cheaper to take them to small
Small
claims
claims
court rather than digging up their pipes?
Probably, yeah, but it would be the same, it'd be the same outcome as a judgment, basically, because they would just basically, in small claims court, would have a court order, I guess.
Yeah.
Pay the fee, which is the same as a judgment, like they get with the judgment process, like they get served, they get it's the whole 9 yards, which is the exact same thing that would happen in
Yeah.
small claims
Yeah.
court. Yeah.
So do we need to make like a motion here to say we agree with raising these fees to
Well,
four
we
hundred
we-
dollars?
we just budget season, so we're gonna have to set a budget.
We want the direct, it's not tonight that we're setting the budget.
But we're actually, you guys to
Yeah.
set numbers.
Yeah.
So,
Cause this is basically like, this is what it is, it's proposed, and so we're bringing it, before the meeting on the November meeting, when we're hoping to pass the budget, to make sure that we can have this
Tonight on
conversation.
this, we're
No.
just, this is a round table kind of thing.
Yeah, and if there's a conversation around rates,
Yeah.
and we have to, we'll tweak the bylaw for the November meeting, we can have first reading, because it's a small change.
Can I make a suggestion? I
That's what
don't
we're here
disagree, I don't disagree with the need to go to the $400. But we already have large tax increases across the municipality. Could we, for 1 year, adjust the transfers to allow us to step it? We'll do 50% of that to put, like, go up
over a 3-year period.
over a 2-year period, or
I was gonna ask about how we could do it over a couple of year period, but I didn't know.
What you see in the trend, like,
instead of hitting,
We'll transition to-
instead of hitting the, we did, Ward 3 with a $75 increase, let's do half of that in over 2 years. So
So
we-
what happens when you have to increase it to more than 400 next year?
It's $75 to buy
Well, I guess
them.
that's the question, what we envision.
I mean-
well, because that's why we've mentioned the deficit. So the deficit next year that we'll have on the books is $43, or no, 43,000, it's $37, when you divide it by the number of units. So there's some flexibility there with things that won't necessarily be on the budget, but they're, like, that's what we're looking at next year alone.
So basically, yeah, so we're,
Based on.
Say that sentence again, we're absorbing a $37,000 budget.
No, we're not
Deficit
absorbing it, so right,
next
yeah,
year.
because it carries 3 years over.
Right, so in 2025, we already are in the hole by 30-some-thousand.
40-some thousand, which
40-some-thousand.
equates
I
to
get it.
30-some per unit.
Right, and if that's what it costs to operate, plus
Yeah.
an increase
right.
presumably of, let's say, 5%, plus we're already in the hole for
So if that's what it's cost to
Yeah.
operate, we have to be.
You have to put it through. I
We
mean,
have to put it
you
through.
don't have a
I mean,
choice.
that was a good question, but if we're in a deficit, we're in a deficit.
Yeah.
We can't operate in
Yeah.
deficit.
Show me what, put in.
Unfortunately, this obviously wasn't looked at before now, and. we're-
Exactly.
This is the problem. It's
That was the
been
$75.
compiling.
It's just the
It's
same as
just
the
that-
operating. Nothing got
Absolutely.
touched for
Exactly.
years and years because we wanted to
Exactly.
be the lowest and now we're
Exactly.
stuck.
Challenge. So
Yeah.
is that from John?
Yeah,
From Councillor Wade, there's a question on how the $75 was determined.
So the utility budget, well, similar to the municipality's budget, has to balance. So the income and revenue has to balance, or sorry, the income and revenue, the revenue and expenses. And so with the utility, we put in the costs, and then we have a certain number of units, which is 1,157. And so you essentially divide that by the total expenses. Yeah. And that gives you the rate.
So why do we no longer do a connection charge?
That was
Is that
something that was dropped in that last sewer.
building?
So previously to this, when people would get a building permit to build, they had to actually put in the sewer connection to the main for most of the lots. The subdivision bylaw changed so that when you're putting in a street and doing a subdivision, the laterals are already in place. So the lateral comes from the sewer main right into your property. So we don't actually have to go out into the road anymore. So the connection fee was there, and it was only $100, by the way, for us to go up, and make sure that when they connect to the main, they don't ruin our main. And so like I said, we haven't charged a connection fee because almost every single building lot, there's only been maybe 1 or 2 that didn't already have that lateral put in place, or, yeah.
Another one on here.
Does the 50 increase, therefore, does a $50 increase this year and a $50 increase next year help deal with both deficit and need for additional funding?
So if we have a $50 in terms of the utility, you need to find 57,850.
To take it.
So yeah, so if you're gonna look at it that way, $50
It'll mean
on the rate
we're running a
means
deficit,
cutting
which is
57,000.
similar to what Councillor Oblias had asked.
No, you can't run the deficit. We have to cut 57,000 in
So,
expenses.
so the $75 increase recommended by the clerk's office was to ensure we don't run a deficit.
A $75 increase is only $86,000. So if you're going $50, it's gonna be more than, it's gonna be
50
times 1157.
times 11. 57 is 57,850.
So it's 30,000 difference.
30,000.
How do you have to find 30,000?
Oh, I didn't do the difference you mean between 75 and 50.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just doing exactly like that, like what, $50.
Regardless if we go below
But you're right.
75,
Sorry,
right,
yeah.
that was-
Yeah.
It's unfortunate with the sewer, that's the only revenue option you have is the sewer units.
Well,
So,
we could offset it in the salary expenses transfer line.
Yeah, which the only challenge that what I was mentioning to the team as we were going through the discussions is it should be quantified, because maybe it should be 500, that's obviously an exaggeration. Maybe it should be 500,000, maybe it should be 50,000
So how did you jump, like, what made you come up with the
to
200?
balance it,
But like, did you look at it, like, whose salaries are going in there?
That's what
How
we
much
have
is
to
the admin?
quantify.
So you haven't done that yet.
So
Can you
that's-
do that before it comes back to budget, just to
Yes.
make sure?
Yeah, we can try, it's gonna be, it's a ballpark, and it has to be a consistent
For
ballpark.
sure a
Yeah.
ballpark, but come up with a formula of like
Yes.
how much time is in the admin office is being spent calling for collections. That's a huge portion of probably one person's
notices,
salary.
posting, taking, yeah,
Right, plus you've got probably all of Trevor,
Yeah.
some of the boys.
Yeah.
all of the
And that means
maintenance,
then-
all of,
Uh,
yeah.
And,
Right.
And so,
So maybe we can offset it just with that line, cause maybe 230 isn't enough now that everybody's salaries were adjusted.
the challenge with, decreasing it too is it's gonna have a net impact on the operating budget.
Right.
So it's, which there's more flexibility in the operating budget for us to,
Right.
to adjust.
Right.
So
Um,
from what I'm hearing, I'll get John and Joe's input, but directing council or clerk's office to go forward with 75, coming back with
Yes.
some information on the staffing allocations.
John has another
John?
question. So can the industrial rate be adjusted separate from the residential? Yes,
Per unit, please.
it would be per unit.
Yeah.
So you could change the rate for industrial, per, like, cause we're unit. Some places did, most places didn't, I don't think, but
Did what? Oh, like,
did have a different rate for industrial versus.
But is industrial like any business, like
That's the
a
other thing.
small
You would
business,
have
like I
to
hate to
decide-
vote for a small
Right.
business owner?
You'd have to decide what's industrial versus, so when we're going through it, we're trying to do that. So a commercial business, a home business,
Mhm.
as it is now. So if you have a home business such as a hair salon in your house, you pay 1 unit for the house, you pay 1 unit for the hair salon.
Mhm.
If you have, an insurance, I don't know, one time there was insurance, there was, I'm trying to think, other home businesses.
It's like an accounting.
Even if you have a 2 unit. Get charged the 2 units.
and the school, for
School
instance, goes a number of units based on number of students, so,
and staff.
and staff, yeah, occupancy in the building,
Right.
basically.
Okay.
Yeah, so
So
that's
there-
how it's set.
Trouble with some of them in the, upper regions of it's the flow was done how many years ago, and this is
Which-
what the amount was, and that's what we're using.
Which we have to do.
It
proper
could be
flow.
updated.
Oh, that's.
Which
brilliant.
is why we need to be able to be doing
The
that.
money needs to be there to do it. It's
And it
not,
costs money to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And we haven't, I don't think we've been getting the proper.
You haven't been getting any flow?
I know, that's-
Oh, you mean
No, no.
proper income? Oh.
yeah. So when,
I think there's an opportunity there to get income. If
Yeah.
we can, by doing what we're doing, we should be able to get the proper readings, which then we'll be able to charge properly. We just don't have that information today.
How much does it cost to do that? And should it be done annually?
Has to be done through the full year, I
the
think.
problem is that it has to be a full year because sometimes it's different flows.
It's
than
measuring the
others.
complete
Ah,
flow.
So
Think
it's
of
measuring the
seasonal.
complete
There's huge op-
got it.
there's huge
flow from
opportunities
each
there.
business would be
Yeah.
another thing. So do you put one, next to one business, find out what their flow is, put one next to the other business, what is their flow, put one next to the other business. If you put it lower, you're getting all of them, and how do you divide? Do you see what I'm saying?
And how much is that, do we think? Like, should that be, I would very much like to do that. So should that be put in this budget?
There's a allocation for engineering fees, it's not gonna cover flow
It's not.
monitoring.
It's
There's
Okay.
options to explore, I'll put it that
I think we
way.
have to have, I think
Okay.
that's a whole separate discussion
Yeah.
because again, there's other contracts that are involved in that, I think we have to have discussions on.
And bylaws,
Bylaws.
and bylaws, actually, yeah.
That's a 2025 budget discussion
That-
then.
It's huge.
There's other options with it, there's options with it, we'll put it that way.
Huge one. I think there's an opportunity there.
But
Good
to
question.
John's question, the businesses are paying more now. because you are like.
You're paying
in-
double. Yeah.
You're paying double because in
Some
the
of
event that
them.
there's a
Based on units.
business, exactly.
Why do you say some of them?
Well, because if you have a daycare or something like that, the daycare is by how many, students or.
Oh, I see, okay.
So like kind of occupancy, so you might still only be paying one. If
Okay.
you have I'm trying to get some, a church only
Mhm.
pays one unit. Well, does a church use it? Probably more, but all of the churches only get charged one unit.
Mhm. They're probably only using it for.
But they
Okay.
usually use it for one day.
But
Yeah.
some
One
do,
day.
some use it all year
Yeah.
round
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
no, but I mean, there's lots, so you have to decide how, but that's what it is.
Mhm.
So each one in our bylaw is, so that's something, as we're saying, like, we'll go through that and adjust some of them. Maybe those need to be updated too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when was the last time they were updated? 19.
No, January, technically.
We didn't update that,
Yeah.
but yeah, those would like look and see what everybody else is doing and.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
something-
That's a good question by Councilor Weeb. I think that is, we have to really get into this year.
We have to pay the bills.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly, we have to.
Yeah.
I can't see, is there any additional questions?
Nope.
John and Joe, are you good?
Yep, fascinating discussion.
Good.
Always glamorous, isn't it?
Yes. Okay, with that, I think we've given direction to staff. Steve?
Have we given direction to proceed with looking at changing the payment?
I was just gonna.
Yeah,
ask
that's what we,
So-
because we need to update the bylaw, so what are our
like,
preference on that?
personally, if you guys think that going twice a year is a good idea, I'm fine with that. I'd love to get a discount for the people who pay it all up front. That's just my personal opinion. But that's because
That's a
I
great
would pay it
incentive.
up
That's a great
But we have to
incentive.
increase the rate.
front. Yeah.
So that's what I don't know.
You do, you would have to increase the rate by the discounted amount
That's
and guess what your discount amount would be, because we took the discount out
Mhm.
for that instead of upping the sewer one year, we just took the discount.
Yeah.
There should be a
So then it
discount
drops.
to pay though, because otherwise
It's
people are still
like-
taking the option to pay twice. I want to pay again.
$40 per
So would I.
unit. Can I find that somewhere else? Like, anyway, that's just,
And some
Right.
people I can almost guarantee,
just thoughts.
I should say almost, I would guarantee there will be people that come in, if they know it's going to be 400 and you're gonna get twice, some will come in and pay it today, get it
It-
done and they don't. have to do it.
That would be me.
It would be
Yeah.
nice if there was.
So there will be some, but-
Maybe we could give them a free pen.
So Austin, I just give you one caveat, is that if you do go twice a year, you're really, really gonna have to make sure people are aware, because those people who are accustomed to paying once,
That's
they
right.
pay, they probably don't pay attention to whether it's 200 or 400.
It'd be a
Then when
nice
you have another bill
range
6 months
time.
later, you're gonna have people saying, what the heck, I just paid this.
Absolutely
I
correct.
agree, Councilor
So
Victoria. That's
you
why I was
could
gonna
have
ask
that,
for email
that,
reminders or
that big of an
something.
issue.
But John also asked, the deficit should be split between residents and commercial/industrial.
But they're all together now. Should be split. I don't know what you mean.
I don't understand that
I
question,
don't
sorry.
know.
Or I don't know if it was a statement or.
John, could you clarify, John?
More of a statement, just that if you're short, you said 80,000 or 57,000, whatever it was, half of it should be a residential increase, half of it should be industrial increase to cover that shortfall.
Went further, we will be.
Basically, what he's saying is we would change the unit charge for, depending on, yeah.
But Sherry, you guys can explore that further.
I think that's
So-
an exploration.
I think,
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea.
And-
And I think that we have to dig into that.
The other thing too is that when, like, say when we have this rate, we know that next year we'll have a deficit. Hopefully the intent is the following year we won't. And so that means that we could say there will be an increase if you pay ahead of time, your rate stays the same. Like, that's an option if we can't, like, we'll explore it. That's
Fun
all I'm
idea.
I like
saying.
that idea.
If we can't make it happen like that.
Yeah.
What are we looking at in terms of, I don't know what it was before, what was the discount option before?
$15.
Okay,
And then at one point we dropped it.
I remember being outraged when that percentage.
Yeah,
disappeared.
no, I was gonna say
it was 15 when the rate was 300.
300, I think.
no, I think it
Even
was
less.
before that. Yeah, there was a discount when I came.
Let's say 295,
So it
205.
changed. Yeah, there was a percentage and so it depended on, I'm trying to remember.
Okay, we'll explore some options to see if we can.
That'd be great.
And like I said, then they adjusted the discount, so it was a little bit less of a discount. Then they adjusted it so that it wasn't as long, because again, because sewer has to pay for itself, we do not get anything from the province.
Mhm.
Come January, our bills are still due. Those power bills are still
Yeah.
due.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if there's no money, so they wanted to try to get as much payments as early as possible to pay the bills.
Mhm.
So it was to encourage people to try to pay their bills before the end of, but that's also another thing. If you're gonna do twice a year, you've got to decide if you're going to.
Well, your operating fund bank balance basically floats your utility bank
It
balance.
does.
Yeah.
But if you're going to give them, a discount for or like, don't charge interest for a couple months in January, do you not charge interest for the couple months when you do the second half? Or do you just go back to, you only have 30 days to pay, or
Yeah,
like, there's
it
things
would
like
have
that to really.
That would have to be
decide.
included in the bylaw.
Yeah.
Net.
That feels complicated,
It
guys.
does.
So it's getting really complicated.
I honestly think maybe you're better off with
One payment.
one payment and discount it.
Yeah.
If you can.
We'll come back with some options.
Yep.
So we're gonna have to come back with some options, but we wanted direction on the rate and the cost.
Good question, good conversation, a good opportunity for the future. With no additional questions, so I have a motion to adjourn. Great.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Thorne, seconded by Deputy Mayor Bannister. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye. We are adjourned.